Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly mind-bending, a concept that literally bridges the gap between theoretical physics and computer science. We're looking at a brilliant conceptual model by Hakan Uçuk called the projection framework. If you've ever found yourself wondering how the deep, invisible mechanics of the cosmos actually organize themselves, well, you are in exactly the right place. Because today, our entire focus is on the 5 layers of universal reality. We're going to explore how the fundamental fabric of existence might actually be stacked and structured exactly like a computer's architecture. I promise you, by the end of this explainer, you're going to look at space and time in a completely different way.
Okay, let's dive into this. Think about the device you're using to listen to this right now. You're interacting with a very specific interface, right? Pixels, colors, shapes. You aren't seeing the silicon transistors or the binary logic gates or the power supply. But they're absolutely there, working in the dark to make your entire experience possible. Now, what if the universe works the exact same way? What if our observable universe, literally everything we can see, touch, and measure, is just a front-end user interface for a much deeper, hidden architecture? Imagine if gravity, light, and mass were just the rendered outputs of a massive, invisible machine humming just beneath the surface.
To unpack all of this, we're taking a highly structured tour today. First up, the cosmic computer analogy, followed by the 5 layers of universal reality. Then we'll contrast source code versus natural law. And finally, we'll examine the ultimate sandbox limitation.
All right, Section 1, the cosmic computer analogy. To really wrap our heads around this abstract cosmology, we can ground it perfectly in the very tech you use every single day.
But hey, before we go any further, I want to clarify something really important so we frame this right. The source material is explicitly clear. This framework does not suggest that the universe is literally a computer. We're not talking about some literal simulation where a cosmic teenager is playing a video game in their basement. No, this is an elegant conceptual analogy. We use it because the layered architecture of a computer is simply the most efficient, reliable system for generating and managing complex realities that human beings currently understand. It's really the best framework we have to separate the reality we observe from the underlying mechanics that might actually power it.
Moving on to Section 2, the core of our focus today, the 5 layers of universal reality. Let's look at how this architecture builds a stable universe right from the ground up.
Now, what's really interesting here is how perfectly standard computing components map onto theoretical cosmology. On one side, you have your basic everyday computing structure, right? Hardware, operating system, drivers, game engine, and finally the application. Uçuk maps these directly to his projection framework. We start at the base with S-matter and S-energy, step up sequentially through the execution and projection layers, all the way to the projected universe, which is the application that we actually live inside at the very top.
This structural integrity is just everything. Looking at these 5 steps, notice how the entire system builds strictly from the bottom up. It's kind of like a cosmic house of cards. Every single layer absolutely depends on the one right beneath it. Remove the hardware, and the operating system crashes. Remove the execution environment, and the application just vanishes. This bottom-up dependency is absolutely vital for the 5 layers to function cohesively without collapsing into total chaos. So let's break down exactly what each of these foundational layers actually does.
Right at the very bottom, we've got Layer 1, the hardware. In this framework, this vital role is filled by what Uçuk calls S-matter and S-energy. And it's wild to think about, but this base layer doesn't actually determine the behavior of the universe. It doesn't decide that gravity pulls or that light shines. It honestly has no discernible rules of its own. It's literally just raw, humming, physical potential. It merely provides the underlying capability for everything else to even exist. Without Layer 1, nothing runs.
Sitting right on top of that raw substrate is Layer 2, the operating system. In this model, this perfectly corresponds to the 5th dimension. Just like your phone's OS quietly manages memory and background tasks, this 5th dimension coordinates the entire cosmic projection process. And here's the absolute kicker. Just like a regular PC user never literally sees their operating system's binary code, we, as 3D and 4D beings living inside the projected universe, are basically the users. We are completely blind to this 5th-dimensional OS working tirelessly behind the scenes to make sure our reality doesn't crash.
Then we step up to Layer 3. The drivers. In the tech world, drivers let your software talk to the physical hardware without needing to understand exactly how the literal circuitry works. Well, here, this layer acts as that exact same crucial interface. It bridges the 5th dimension and that underlying S-matter, which means the higher, much more complex levels don't ever need to deal with the messy mechanics of the foundation. It just translates everything seamlessly. And honestly, thank goodness the universe never pauses to prompt you to update your graphics drivers, right?
That brings us to Section 3, Source Code versus Natural Law. This is a critical pivot in our explainer, where we draw a very hard, empirical line between the hidden rules of reality and the everyday physics that human science actually studies.
And this brilliantly illustrates that strict separation. On one side, we have Layer 4, the Projection Codex. Think of this as the ultimate source code, the underlying execution rules generating the universe uniformly. There are absolutely no arbitrary exceptions here, no magic, no universe-breaking cheat codes. Then, sitting right above that, we have Layer 5, the natural laws. These are the observable behaviors we study every day: gravity, thermodynamics, quantum mechanics, all of that. To put it simply, the codex is the hidden engine, and natural law is the observable output that the engine produces.
Actually, the author of this framework ran his concepts past some advanced AI systems for an architectural peer review, and Gemini AI provided this incredibly poignant insight. The Projection Codex is the source code, while the natural laws we observe are the compiled, executing program. That is profound. Think about the sheer violent chaos of a distant supernova or the delicate microscopic complexity of human DNA. According to this framework, all of that breathtaking complexity is just the compiled program running perfectly from a set of stark, uniformly executed base rules.
From a system architect's point of view, this setup is basically flawless, and that's thanks to what software engineers call clean API boundaries. If you aren't familiar, an API boundary is basically an impenetrable wall that lets two systems talk to each other without ever seeing each other's inner secrets. Because of this wall, Layer 5, our universe, operates entirely on its own independent runtime. It strictly prevents system leakage. A glitch in Layer 5 doesn't corrupt Layer 1. And because of this brilliant boundary, empirical science remains 100% uncompromised. When a physicist discovers general relativity, they aren't accidentally stumbling into Layer 4. They are literally just learning the rules of the rendering engine, running entirely inside Layer 5.
All right, on to our final section, the ultimate sandbox limitation. Here, we'll look at the AI peer review phase and impartially evaluate the empirical limits of this whole cosmological theory.
So, the crucial point to understand here is the sandbox effect. In computing, if you build a perfect virtual machine, the software running inside it is structurally and physically incapable of inspecting the host operating system running it. It's like, think of a video game character, like Mario, trying to look out of the television screen to inspect the physical console he's running on. He physically can't do it. If Uchuk's architecture works flawlessly, with no cheats and no breaks, then we, as observers inside Layer 5, are exactly like Mario. We are permanently trapped in the sandbox. As Gemini AI clearly pointed out regarding this very limitation, we cannot reconstruct the entire repository of the source code merely by watching the pixels move on the screen. And that is the ultimate consequence of the 5 layers. You can stare at gravity all day, you can measure the faint light from the most distant stars, but just watching those pixels move in Layer 5 will never, ever let you reverse engineer the OS in Layer 2 or the physical hardware in Layer 1. The abstraction layer keeping us locked out is just too flawlessly designed.
What this practically means is that translating this beautiful framework into testable empirical science requires finding what engineers would call a read-only leakage point. In layman's terms, we would literally need to find a glitch in the matrix. We'd need the deeper substrate to leave a unique, measurable fingerprint on our layer, like some bizarre mathematical anomaly in our telescopes that absolutely defies Layer 5 physics. Without finding that literal glitch in the rendering engine, the framework remains a brilliant, logically consistent philosophical architecture, rather than an empirically testable scientific fact.
To summarize the impartial AI audit, both ChatGPT and Gemini completely agreed that this framework is conceptually sound and structurally safe. And this consensus is highly significant because it demonstrates the absolute logical airtightness of the 5-layer framework, even if our human telescopes haven't quite caught up yet. It elegantly separates the observable universe from hypothetical implementation rules and completely preserves all established physics. However, it still requires independently testable predictions before it can elevate from a highly intuitive conceptual framework into accepted, rigorous scientific knowledge.
Which leaves us with this final, profoundly shifting thought. Take another look around you. The next time you drop an object and watch it fall to the floor, ask yourself, are you actually watching physics, or are you just watching the engine at work? Is what we call everything, the stars, the planets, the device you're holding, your own 2 hands, just the front-end user interface of a much deeper, quietly humming computational stack? It's a question that completely changes how you look at the mechanics humming just beneath reality's surface. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I'll catch you next time.